on the physical aspects of goaltending.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah. And thanks for being here almost on time. It was a quick coffee break. So we're going to get right to this. And I wanted this to contain one panel with physical aspects and tomorrow with the mental aspects. So I brought in 3 people I know very well that they have done research on this topic. And we also have an expert who is a practitioner in this field. And we have a former goalie now being in management in hockey. So we will start with Tobias Werner, who has done, which you probably know, most of you, deep research for the Swedish Hockey Association about hip and groin problems in goaltending. We will have Meg Harrington, who's done terrific research in past years in Canada on issues with goalies starting early. So what does early specialization mean for those problems actually that Tobias has been researching? And we have researching coming in the future from Anton Edlund here, who is doing a couple of years, maybe he will present this himself, maybe 4 or 5 years ahead in time now. He's going to work for the Federation with hockey in general, but of course goalies will be in there. And he actually has guidance by Tobias in his research. And Maria Mountain, I guess all you know, is one of the leading experts in the world in physical training for goalies. And she will be on this panel so we can see the practice point of view here from someone who works with a lot of goalies on all kinds of different ages and levels. And also from the goalie side, will be awarded into the IHF Hockey Hall of Fame in a couple of days, Kim Martin. Our Swedish leading goalie over the years on the women's side, playing for several tournaments, Olympic silver medalist, and also now working in management in, I should say, one of the top clubs, or the top club on the women's side in Sweden, Frölunda. So we'll start off with Tobias.
Hey everybody, nice to be here. Thanks a lot for the invitation. I start off by saying that I'm very impressed by the community you guys have and the interaction that you have with each other and learning from each other in dialogue. This is actually how every profession should work. So great being here and being part of this. I was asked to start here by talking a couple of minutes about my research. That's very difficult to tell to someone. A couple of minutes, a couple of slides, tell people what you've done. I put together a QR code with a summary of the studies we've performed within hockey. I see some people are doing this. Let's just check if it's the right code. Yes, there are studies coming up. That's nice. Perfect. So this slide says my journey. And it's basically not a slide to brag about what I've done, but more to show what you can do in collaboration. Because my research about ice hockey players started with Thomas coming in the clinic where I work as a physical therapist. And it would have never been possible with such great collaboration between practitioners, people working on the field, on the ice, with the athletes, and us having the research ideas, and together we try to move the field forward. So the couple of minutes I would spend on is on groin pain and hip and groin problems in ice hockey players. I start broad, and I start with a cross-sectional study that we published first here, where we asked around 330 players if they had a hip and groin problem in the previous season. And then we asked them to reply to a questionnaire that's measuring their current hip and groin function. And what we found there was that 1 in 3 players had a time loss problem due to hip and groin pain, so they were not able to participate in ice hockey. And almost half of all players had a non-time loss problem, which is characterized by pain that is affecting performance, but not the ability to participate. So these players are playing despite having pain. And we also found that after off-season, in the beginning of the new season, the players that had problems in the previous season still had significantly impaired hip and groin function. The longer you had the problems, the more impaired the function was. Now, in this study, we actually did not find any difference between playing positions. And this is a finding that surprised us, but it was a study connected to a bigger cohort study where we had all the goaltenders in Sweden, but we got the skaters just voluntarily answering. So we think we had some selection bias in there. So the skaters that had problems were more inclined to reply to the survey. So the problem is bigger in goaltenders. Now, this is why you are here. And this is the study that I hope and think some of you might have read before. We did a one-season study and followed elite goaltenders in Sweden. And we asked them to reply to a questionnaire every other week that was reporting hip and groin symptoms and problems. And the main findings were that over the course of a whole season, 7 out of 10 goaltenders reported to have a hip and groin problem at some point. And if we go and look at prevalence, so we just zoom in different time points during the season and describe how many had problems, then we found that 3 out of 10 goaltenders had a problem at any given time during the season. And 1 in 10 had a severe problem. And our definition of severe problems is a problem that affects performance to a severe degree or leads to the inability to participate in training or games. Now, a little side note here. Hip and groin problems, it's not only a male problem, it's also a problem in female. Here you see the data from a prospective study on the first league for women here in Sweden. This is overuse injuries, and on the x-axis you see the incidence, so how often those injuries occur, and on the y-axis you see the severity score, so what is the burden of those injuries. And the hip and groin is most common and stands actually for half of the burden among all overuse injuries. So that's not just a male problem. We did another study where a lot of you probably participated, right? You answered a questionnaire where we asked you to rate the demand on the hip and groin of different goaltending movements. And to quantify that, we made that model. Now I say we, it was basically Thomas doing this model. I really like it. And you can jump in and correct me if it gets things wrong here, but we divided goaltending into stances, positions, and transitions between those two, as well as movements in the crease. And then we asked goaltenders and their coaches to rate how demanding those different movements and positions were. And the main findings are here. Most demanding is post-play, the RVH, and butterfly. And when it's about transitions, then we can say that everything involving the RVH was rated most demanding. A good thing, or a positive finding for the athlete, I think, was that coaches perceived movements more demanding than athletes. I think that's positive, that you guys seem to be cautious about the movements and the strain you put on the goaltender's hips. And senior goaltender perceive movements also more demanding than junior goaltenders, which is not very surprising, but I think we get more into that later on. So those were my couple of minutes, and we can go on with the next steps.
Thank you.
And Meg.
Okay. And thanks, Thomas, for inviting me here, and it's great to be here with all of you, and I'm really looking forward to the rest of the weekend learning. And so a little bit more background on me. I do biomechanics research, mostly on the lower extremity. That's why my model doesn't even have arms. And then mostly injury work. And I am specifically interested in young adult hip disorders, which led me into doing some ice hockey goaltending research. And for the first goalie study that I did, I was looking at comparing early sport specialized versus not early sport specialized goalies, and to see how their hip mechanics different through a couple dynamic tasks. So, and to collect the data for this study, I used the markerless motion capture, which is really nice and easy to, they come into the lab, we immediately start collecting data. I would like to acknowledge that for this study, we did decide to do a slide board, so there is a limitation of we don't yet know how generalizable these results are to on ice. But for this first study, the $100 DIY slide board was a little bit more feasible than renting all the ice for the players. And so there was two main findings from the results of this study. The first was that the goalies who are early specialized tend to move with more internal rotation and abduction at lower ranges of hip flexion, but then it was reversed for when they were at higher ranges of hip flexion. So they would move with less internal rotation and less abduction compared to the not early specialized goalies, which you can see in this figure that I have. The red skeletals are the early specialized group's average for the specific points of the butterfly slide movement, and the blue is for the not early specialized. And the first skeleton, two skeletons show that the early specializations had the less internal rotation at the max point of hip flexion during the movement, but then at the minimum hip flexion during the movement, when they're in the butterfly position near the end of the slide, that they actually had much more internal rotation. And then the second main finding that I found interesting was that the goalies didn't move with the degrees of combined hip range of motion that we would have expected to be associated with the risk of femoroacetabular impingement when the goalies would go into complete end range and have that bone-on-bone contact. But we did see these movement pattern differences. So unfortunately, there's not specific takeaways that would be super relevant to you yet with this research. But the main one is I think that just categorizing on whether goalies are early specialized or not early specialized doesn't give us enough insight about injury risk. I think we need to look more into how they're loading through the movements, how much load, if they're going to be doing other activities, what are those other activities? Because if they don't early specialize in hockey, but they're playing another sport, like a couple other sports also for the full time of the year, they're still going to be at a higher injury risk. And then there's also quite a bit more data to come from this study. So I did collect the stances, RVH, VH, butterfly, standing ready stances to see kind of what are the hip mechanics that are different, and also the knee and ankle. So that will be a nice follow-up to your study. And then there's another new study that's coming, thanks to Matt, who got me involved in this research. We're looking at the biomechanical difference between smaller scaled nets to full-size nets for 10U goalies. And so the two main things that we're looking at is going to be compared to older goalies on the full-size nets, are if we scale the nets for the 10U players, are they going to be moving more similarly to the older players? And then we can get insights into maybe the scaled nets would be developmentally beneficial. And then also, I want to look at it from the injury perspective, and are these goalies moving during, if we do different game situations, then are they moving with more frequent and greater ranges of hip motion when they're on the full-size nets to the scaled nets? Because then maybe the scaled nets could also be beneficial for lowering injury risk. And then a second analysis that I would like to do for this, since we'll be collecting the older 16 to 18U goalies, we'll have their biomechanical data. So to start getting into exploring some predictive relationships between their mechanics, injury risk, and performance, that will all be very exploratory and new and has a long way to go, but hopefully this will be a nice start. So, thank you. I'll pass it off to Matt.
Okay, so to begin with, just thank you, Thomas, for the opportunity to be here and to share the panel with such a skilled group. It's amazing, and I can just second what Tobias said during his intro there regarding the goalie community. I'm a former D-man myself, so I've always, yeah, I know, I'm one of them. I know.
Okay, thank you.
Exactly. Yeah, so sorry about that. But I've always been impressed by the goalie coaches, like the way you work. You can share like this one day and then you compete on the ice the other day. And I've always been impressed by that. So great to be here on the right side to speak and present. And as Thomas mentioned, I've been asked to summarize my upcoming 4 years in 5 minutes. Mm-hmm. So that's going to be quite a challenge, but I will try my best. I'm a former player myself. I worked in hockey as a scout and in player development. So I'm very well aware of what Hannu was talking about, like the big picture with many people involved. Now I'm in academia as a PhD student up in Umeå University. We have a research project in collaboration with the Swedish Ice Hockey Association, where Thomas is a part of the project group and where Tobias is one of my supervisors. So we've been hearing about what has happened in the past and what we have found so far, or what Tobias and his colleagues have found so far. So we know that it is a problem, right? And you can also tell out on the field that this is something, hip and groin problems is something that's a part of your daily life and your daily work with the goalies. But it's important for us now to take a step from knowing that it is a problem and working towards the ultimate goal. Because everyone wants to know, okay, we know it is a problem, but what are we going to do? That's probably the most frequently asked question, and that's what everyone is interested in. But I would like to answer the question right now, but unfortunately we don't know enough to be able to say that yet. So what we are doing, or what we lack knowledge about, is the injury classification. So we know that this area of our body is a big area, and a lot of things can go wrong in this area. So we need to know a little bit more about where is the injuries coming from, where is the pain coming from. And that's one of the things that we're looking at. And we also know that it's probably, based on Tobias' research from before, we probably know that it has some kind of variation over a full year. Like, you know, when you're coming on the ice for the first time after off-ice training, you know that we can probably see something more than we're doing during the regular season. But we don't know that, especially not in junior players that we're going to look at. And the biggest question then that we also need to work on is how do we better know how to prevent these problems or to work with them when they occur. So what we're doing in our project is that we are doing this in 5, or actually I'm going to present 4 projects. And the first one is that we're doing this project on male junior players in our under 20 league. And what we're doing is this injury classification that I mentioned. So we want to know a little bit more about how we classify these injuries and how common the different classifications are. And why do we do this? We do this because we need to understand the origin of the problem a bit more. And we're actually doing the same thing in female elite players in SDHL. And as Tobias mentioned, it's not just a male problem. If you're talking back with physiotherapists that maybe worked 15, 20 years ago, it was told that this is a male problem more than a female problem. But we can see that it has an impact on both sexes. So our third project is that we're doing this on high schools, or NIU for those in Sweden. It's basically hockey high school students, and we're also doing it on female juniors. So we want to reach some more females, because there's still male dominant when it comes to numbers in terms of how many that are going to hockey high schools. And we want to look at the seasonal variation, because we want to give something to you that are working on the field. So, okay, we know that during these times of the year, you might have to be a little bit more cautious or a little bit more, okay, we know that maybe this time of the year is maybe a bit more crucial. And the last one, I usually call it the crown jewel of what we are going to do. We want to see something about how we can prevent. And I wrote both prevention and intervention, and I did that because there's going to be players that are entering this study that are pain-free or problem-free, and some of them having problems as well. And we want to see where both groups are going with our two different interventions that we are going to test. And why? As I said, it's probably the ultimate goal. And I wish that when we are done with this, I wish that we could say, okay, let's do this, and we have the answer. It might not be that simple, so don't expect that, but expect, hopefully, another piece in the puzzle in order to get there. And we need to put this in a goalie context, right? Because we're here. So all these projects are going to be divided into different positions. So we will be able to look at the goalie specifically. So in a couple of years, I will be able to stand here and say, okay, and take out only the goalies and say, okay, how did the goalies respond to all this? Thank you.
Yeah, so, whoa, geez. So we're going to obviously field some questions. I need to be able to repeat the question for the recording. So you can raise your hand if you have a question for a specific guest on the panel. Just make sure you state that as well.
Start with Maria and Kim.
Yeah, and obviously Maria and Kim, you guys should have an opportunity to talk a little bit about, Maria, your latest work. Or maybe some of your thoughts on the studies that have taken place, and just your general, opinion on where things are at with hip and groin issues.
Well, I think the research is so exciting, and starting with the work that Tobias did to establish the problem and the prevalence of the problem. We all knew it was a problem, but when you can put numbers on it, when you're talking to organizations, coaches, it makes a big difference. So I'm really excited to hear what's coming. In the olden days when I was in grad school, if it wasn't related, if we couldn't somehow make it relate to heart disease or arthritis or something, you couldn't get funding. So that's exciting. I think for me, when we think about these injuries, I've been very interested in sort of the biomechanics of how the pelvis moves and works, and sort of relative motions in the pelvis, because it's not a fixed bone. So it's three bones that are fused together that there's some degrees of freedom. It's not flexible, but there's some degrees of freedom. So it's like if we have a Formula One race car and the chassis has a little wiggle in it, that impacts performance and wear. And so, yeah, that's kind of what I've been ruminating on lately.
And Kim, maybe for you, just speak a little bit about your experience playing. And, Hanu's presentation obviously emphasized everyone's worldview is so different. So what was it like for you as a player, and just hearing the work that these individuals are doing?
No, but I think it's a really important topic. I think when I started to use the RVH, that's when I got my hip problems. So I think that's something that I'm only coaching in the summers now, but something I bring with me, that I can't do too much of the RVH, even if I like using it as a goalie when I played. But just be careful how many repetitions you have, and if you can find other ways to do a drill. But we see that it is younger and younger players, both players and goalies, that get hip problems. So it's obviously something that we have to adapt, or finding solutions. So I think it's a really important topic. Yeah.
Okay. Obviously, we can open it up for questions now. So if anyone has any specific questions, just raise your hand. And again, I'll repeat the question and rephrase it so we get it on the recording. Yeah, Billy, go for it.
So I know in my market, there's starting to be more and more what we call the road leagues or the unsanctioned leagues that I work with. And what I'm seeing them do a lot more with the young athletes is they'll do an hour of training, off-ice training before they get on the ice. So they're already fairly fatigued by the time they get there. So I'd love to see kind of that impact or understand more of what that is. So when I'm on the ice with them, I can kind of tailor my training to reduce that risk of injury on fatigue.
Yeah, so the question is basically what impact can fatigue have prior to getting on the ice if they're doing, pregame warm-up or off-ice training, and how that affects maybe some of the issues that we're seeing. Is that for anyone specifically or just general? Yeah. Anyone want to take that one?
I'll kick it off, but pre-skate warm-up would be different, but doing a full workout before getting on the ice, it's always a matter of knowing what are we trying to achieve with this training session. So I don't think you could say just across the board, oh, that's a bad idea, because it's, well, what's the purpose of the two workouts? What you're describing, it sounds like it's going to be a team workout, which another topic for another day, but so that's just sort of adding fatigue, but maybe not strategically. So it is going to impact, how they perform on the ice. So are the coaches in sync with that, and are they taking that into account? Or do you just have a kid who's bagged, who's out there trying to do these movements and, losing efficiency and adding wear and tear?
Yeah, and I would say that there's probably both situations that I'm coming across, and some of them will actually be, the challenge with some of the organizations is that if you're out there and the kids are pouring sweat, you're not working them hard enough, right? So it's a challenge.
Oh, I had this. When I started, sort of part way in, but my early days, I got a job as like a head coach at a big athlete training facility that was a franchise, so a nice 20,000 square foot thing. But we trained a bunch of teams, and the parents had this little gallery where they would sit and watch, their kids. And yeah, if these kids can't move. Like, these kids can't do a warm-up properly, so we start there and you just hear, what, like, you're not even sweating. Oh, you're not working them hard enough. And it's just it's like, I'm trying to teach your kid to be an athlete here. I'm not trying to torture them,
Anyone else? Yeah. Yep. Right here. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I have some questions. If from a research point of view, if there got to be some statistics about how many hip impingements surgeries that has been done over the years, and if that is decreasing and so forth. Of course, there are other issues with hips, but that could be like one. By coincidence, my son is a goalie, had a double impingement operation this week actually. So just curious if there are some stats about that, if that is increasing or decreasing, or how it differs in different ages and so forth.
So it sounds like the question is, is there a rise or decrease in hip impingement surgeries that have showed up in the data over the past few years? Yep.
First of all, I'm very glad to get that question, because we can start with stating that the actual hip joint as the problem is a quite little part of all the hip and groin problems we see. It's muscles and tendons that make up the big part of problems we see in athletes. So it's less than 10% that is actually the hip joint. When talking about surgery, I can just speak for Sweden. Generally, from 2006 and forward, we saw an exponential increase in surgery all over the world. And we did see that because surgeons became better at accessing the joint and actually performing all the different procedures. And then orthopedic surgery is a bit like the Wild West. Like, when they can do stuff, they will do stuff, and they will do this often to get better at it. And in Sweden, we got data from the national patient registry, so we could select all the hip arthroscopies performed from 2006 through 2018, and we saw that exponential increase until 2014, and then we saw a steady decrease until 2018. From 2018, I can just speculate and reflect on my clinical practice, and there I see less and less of hip arthroscopies, and the ones I do see, they are on a very specific aspect of FAI syndrome. So in Sweden, we only do cam resections, so the bump on the femoral head neck junction, and the demographics of these patient groups has also changed. Right now, I only see young athletes with that problem. Go back 10 years, and I would see like all different age ranges in my clinic, and the outcomes were not very good. They look better now because I think surgeons are better at picking the patients that actually benefit from the procedure. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
Nice.
Steve.
I get a couple of questions on this. The first being, has anybody ever looked at different generations of goaltenders? Because, like I obviously pay a lot of attention to this right now, and it seems to be the buzz of, since the reverse has become a popular save selection or movement, we've said that there's a rise in hip injuries and groin and stuff, and ankles and knees. But then years ago, when you played a different style, when you stood up, all the guys had groin injuries, right? Not as many of the knees and ankles because they're not in that position, but the relative. So as goalie coaches, we're trying to find a solution, right? Whether that solution is we're getting less reps. So maybe first drill of practice, we don't allow the goalies to go down, you're just staying on your feet. And you're trying to save a number of repetitions that add up over the course of the year. Maybe we save 3,000 down and ups, saved a little bit more on the knees, right? Another solution would be that we play scenarios in a game in a different way, right? Whether we stay on our feet a little bit longer and don't get into the reverse as early, and we set different parameters. But as goalie coaches, we're trying to take care of these goalies and make sure that we don't get into these hip and knee injuries. I'm always, I wouldn't say confused, but I'm careful of, yeah, you're saving the hip and knees on this situation, but you're adding more pressure on other parts of your body, right? So a little example, if you gave on a pass out from behind the net, you get into a reverse early, you're not going to have the impact on your knees of going up and down, but you're going to get the sustained pressure on the hip and knees and ankle on the post. Has anybody ever done a generational study so that as the goalie coaches, we're trying to find the solution to help our goaltenders' bodies and give longevity? Well, yes, we might find a solution that, I hear it all the time, the goalies shouldn't be in the reverse. Okay, well, they should be on their feet more. But, anybody I'm an old man now, so when I played, way more groin injuries, but you didn't have necessarily the ankle injuries like they do now. The second part of this same question is, again, because I'm so old, has anybody tied this not only to the save selection, but the equipment generation, right? Like the higher knee rises and being 2 inches off the ice, then now that angle to the ankle is so much different. And we're all trying to get bigger because if you're small like me, you're trying to get the higher knee rises. Well, that would cause different pressure on the ankle and the hips. So has anybody tied in the equipment used today to the injuries as well? Because as a goalie coach in the NHL, I'm not just responsible for the technical, but I'm also responsible for trying to keep that goalie healthy and allow them to have a long, prosperous career. But I find that, like in Hanu's thing, I got 700 people and equipment guys are trying to come in and, you know, make them use different equipment, right? That's a constant battle. Every day I got guys coming in, giving my goalies, hey, try this glove, try this pad, try this. And I'm trying to oversee that. There's a feeling part of the goalie feeling awkward, but then what is the strain on their body? So these are some of my questions that I deal with on a daily basis, trying to
So my chat GPT summary of Steve's question are three things. No, it's great. It was great, and I appreciate the insight. It's the generational differences, the law of unintended consequences, and then it's the equipment, which they all have an impact in some way, shape, or form. So, anyone want to take that one? It's a great one.
So, previous research, not much. I think maybe more what I can speak on. I think biomechanics and motion analysis of the whole body can be a tool to start answering some of these questions. Like what I'm working on with analyzing the data now is seeing in the different positions, looking at the hip, knee, and the ankle. And then to your point about the RVH versus standing, one of the questions I have, which have not got close to answering yet, but is that when you're, even with the skating, and then if you go to stop firm and T-push, that's still sending a lot of loads through the hip. And then if you're doing that more, it's just loading it in a lower range of motion, but still potentially more cumulative load. So I think those are kind of some of the things that I think biomechanics will start to answer, or like not even answer, but like give a little bit of a hint to the solution. And then also being able to evaluate the different equipment. So they're looking at different knee stacks, which I thought there was one study, or at least I've been in conversations talking about this different knee stacks. How's that changing all the like the hip mechanics, knee, ankle, everything like that. So maybe that's my little take.
Would be nice to have Ryan Frame here. He has been looking at the equipment, so I think he will probably have some answers to your questions. I think a lot is regulated by the rules what kind of equipment the players have. I think we could do a lot to save joint one, but as you imply, we probably put a lot of force to the other joints then. So that is it's always a give and take question there. I just want to comment on the different generations. There's not a lot of research. It's an interesting thought. I think a standing goalie is a lot closer to the other change of direction sports where we do see a lot of groin problems. So that is a problem that we see across different sports that force the athlete to do quick changes of directions. And then you also mentioned the rep count of different high-risk activities. I think this is a very delicate trade-off because you want to make your athletes the best version of themselves to protect the net. So they need a certain number of repetitions to succeed in doing so. And for now, we simply don't have the data to say don't do more than X. So to get further there, we actually need to start counting and categorize, okay, who actually gets problems, who does not get problems? Is there an association between a certain amount of RVHs during practice and development of groin pain? And the goaltending model that Thomas developed is a nice way to start quantifying some things. And I could discuss this for days because I
could build on that because we've been talking about this, Maria and Tobias, especially over the years, and with Ryan Frame, who has done some studies for CCM on equipment. So when we discussed this, what Tobias did in his first studies, we said, what is the third part of this, which Anton is now into? What can we do about it? And we discussed, okay, is it the choice of how we make saves? Is it the RVH? Or, I'm glad you mentioned, the full stop on a T-push or a heavy push. We should consider that as well, even if that was not in the study. I believe there is some research from way back on that. And we also discussed, of course, equipment. And I think, this is to you, Steve, who are in the highest level. That's where the rules are made, and it's because the goalies were too good. So they made rules that slimmed down the equipment and everything. If we can prove that the height of the knee stack would be beneficial for the goalies, maybe we could change the rules, but not until they are changed on the NHL level. Or could we perhaps have other rules for kids, where there is not that much of importance if they score a lot of goals for 20,000 people? So maybe we don't need to have the same rules. But we also looked into practice. That's the third part. And that's why I think we need the change that I mentioned at the beginning. We need to be less repetitive. That's why this part of it, the physical part, goes along with how we practice, like Job talked about. We need more variation to be better goalies, but we will also be more sustainable goalies. If we get more variations into practice, more game-like practice, and get drilling out of practice. Drilling is doing the same thing over and over again. Get more game-like practice, game representative practice, doing different things, and getting the perception part, the cognition part that Hannu talked about into our goalie practice, not doing just one thing over and over again, or doing something that is not related to what happens in the game, that make you take in the information, process information, and act on that information, which is a good segue to our last presentation today, which is going to be about this, I believe. How much time do we have? What is it?
12:33.
Yeah, one more question.
I have a question. Is the problem the movement and the movement by itself, or is it more the problem that athletes are probably have disbalance in their bodies or using muscles not the proper way that they can do that movement over and over? That's my question.
Yeah. Summary is it the movement or is it the body?
Is it the chicken or is it the egg? You know, but I think it's the chicken. I think it's the movement patterns, but and hopefully over time some of this will flesh out. Really, we're working on the assumption that if we can clean up the movement patterns, then we're going to reduce the wear and tear. But some of it is just what hip structure were you born with? You know, some kids were born with the hip structure to be a goalie, some weren't. So it's going to have a different effect. But I think the movement, we're not designed to goalie. The average person is not designed to goalie. So, but if we can, teach them to use the right muscles, clean up the movement patterns, there's less wear and tear. It's like, you know, I think of it, you know, if you hit the curb with your car and you put the wheels out of alignment. Okay, well now when I go straight, I hold the wheel like this. I can still drive the car, I can still hit the accelerator and go faster, but I'm going to be in trouble when the brakes and the tires wear out. So that's kind of my perspective on it. But these guys, Tobias, do you have thoughts? Or
I have thoughts, but
I think Hannu wants to.
Yeah, just which ways?
No, just hold it.
So a couple of comments about this one very briefly. Number one, when you're planning your sessions off ice, on ice, keep in your mind that entering the post and leaving the post or go post to post in reverse is the most highly demand load in the goalie. in the net. All the other movements are easier, but here is the really high demand. So how you build up the physics around that one. And second part, the reverse is so much overused. It's like if the kids can't do the reverse, they feel homeless nowadays. And I see millions of videos, even in NHL level, that the totally unnecessary usage of the reverse. It's become like a little bit cliche. There's so many situations where the stand-up is way much better and more effective, especially if there's a risk for low-high pass. How many goals you can see that the goalie is leaning on the post and low-high pass and boom, short side or the far side net. And I make a little claim for Maria especially. This is more grassroots thing. I said that groin problems. Your groin is like a fuse box in your house. You have a main fuse. When something collapses around, then your fuse is boom, boxing. So you need to build up maybe the muscles around your groins a little bit strong, especially in the beginning and end of the movement. That's all.
It's a new Hanuism for us.
Yeah,
Fuse box hips.
that's a great ending, wasn't it?
Yeah, awesome ending.
Yeah.
Thanks for contributing.
Yeah, and unfortunately we don't have time for any more questions, but there will be a lot of questions now in the room or outside, and we have lunch downstairs, and we'll be back here at 1:20, sitting, being ready.
Have a good lunch.
Thank you.